Welcome to the Cairn. I'm Ben Walker. This is where we sit down with leaders navigating real challenges, people thinking seriously about the future and what it takes to balance people, process and technology when everything's changing. Each episode we explore how leaders actually build strategy, drive real change and get things done in an increasingly uncertain landscape. Whether they're transforming education or revolutionising patient care, these are the conversations with people getting it done. Practical thinking, real outcomes. This is the Cairn. Let's get into it. Today I'm joined by Angela Davis. Angela is a strategy consultant based right here in Dunedin. And she spent the last 2 decades helping organisations build strategies that actually get implemented. Her background is fascinating. She trained in psychology and sociology, picked up qualifications from Harvard Business School and the London School of Economics and Digital Innovation and Disruptive Strategy, and has held senior strategy roles across government, tertiary education and the not-for-profit sector. She's worked with the University of Otago, the Ministry for Women, the Centres of Asia Pacific Excellence, and now through her own consultancy, Collective Strategy, she works with councils, universities and community organisations across the country. Angela's also stepping into governance. She's on the board of Startup Dunedin Trust. She sits on the Tuhura Otago Museum Board as Dunedin City Council appointee. Recently completed an 18-month internship on the board of Dunedin International Airport and won the Institute of Directors Otago Southland Emerging Director Award last year. Congratulations, Angela. Angela and I got talking recently, I think it was off the back of a post, whether AI can write a strategy, and let's say it was the catalyst for this conversation. So welcome, Angela.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
So you've spent 20 plus years in strategy and now you run your own consultancy. So that's been probably the last 2 and a bit years now. What drew you to strategy in the first place? And how has your background in psychology shaped how you approach that?
I think psychology probably just indicates a theme that runs through how I approach strategy and why I think strategy is so exciting and useful in any organisation. And it is all about people. So understanding what people need, how people think, how people act. A good strategy can really enable some outcomes that you never thought were possible to be achieved. And strategy, psychology is just really a really good way to understand how people work and think. And it was combined with a sociology degree, so I often think about it as the individual and the collective. So how society works, there's things that are true at a population level or a demographic level that really helps actually with shaping up strategy as well.
Awesome. And recently you posted, I think it was on LinkedIn, 5 ways to kill your strategy. And it was subtitled Public Sector Edition. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so most of my work, my experience is in the public sector, so most of my strategy work has naturally been with public sector clients. And these were just things that I see time and time again. The public sector is awesome at creating a great big document, calling it a strategy, and then 2 years later, perhaps they're sort of doing it again, and maybe it hasn't really made much of a difference. So these were just things that I see come up all the time. And something actually, a trap that I fell into, the first one I put there was trying to please everyone. You want to make sure everyone's visible in the strategy, everyone can see themselves, but that actually, well, that's kind of nice, and perhaps that psychology, sociology perspective, that doesn't achieve a good strategy. You do have to make some decisions. Making it really long, there's this real sort of edification of a 30, 50-page report. Wow, it must be saying something good. Well, guarantee nobody's reading that report or that strategy. So I think kind of really let's glorify a 3-page strategy, that has some really key information up front and people can pick it up and digest it quickly. So there's a few other things, building it in isolation, so just, on your own, and then there's a big reveal, forgetting the roadmap so there's no milestones or key things to measure your progress against, and confusing activity with progress. So we're super busy, we must be making progress, but a good strategy process enables you to step back and see what are the things that you really need to be focusing on to make a difference, to move forward towards this. That busyness is a real trap for all of us, isn't it? So those are just some things that I see quite often, and maybe it was a bit of a playful post on that, but yeah.
And when you're thinking about putting together a meaningful strategy that's concise, How does buy-in from individuals play into that opposed to alignment with the business? Is it a balancing act, or is it no, it needs to be business first and then we need to get the buy-in? Or
Yeah. Maybe if we take a step back a bit and I think about the process that I take clients through, and it's 3 steps really: discover, discuss, decide. So in that discover phase, we're really doing kind of research, looking at things, what's happening in the ecosystem. In that discuss phase, we maybe come with a few priorities or some thinking. And I think to answer your question there, that balancing out, you've kind of done that groundwork. Discussing it with others will help either sharpen your thinking, sharpen those priorities. It will help the people who are going to be delivering that strategy get on board to see that they've had a part to play. If they help build it, they're more likely to implement it. And it really just helps kind of start circulating, this is where we're going, this is the direction we're heading in. So I don't really see it as one more important than the other, but just really 2 steps of an important process. That then you come to the decide part and you'll have a much clearer picture of what's happening.
so I think off the back of probably a couple of your posts, but most recently the one that sort of related to AI got me thinking a bit more, because obviously AI is my day to day. And for me, a lot of organizations are starting to adopt AI, and the gap is growing quite rapidly. And I think some of the organizations that are starting to embrace it in various different ways are using it as an advantage in some areas. But I guess it's one of the core things that we're here to discuss today is how does
To this conversation.
how does it play into strategy? Does it have a role for a start? We'll start there.
Well, I'm so excited to be able to discuss this with you, and I just want to acknowledge that probably anything I say or think might be untrue in 2 weeks' time as I learn something new or AI develops, and just excited to be talking to someone who lives and breathes AI every day. So yeah, keen to have this as a good learning conversation. So I guess what I see, and particularly in the public sector, AI, I guess technology adoption is usually quite slow. They're usually kind of the last people on the train. And there's a good reason for that, because public money, public data, public things, you need to be very careful. You can't be jumping on everything and not understanding the risks. So I don't think that's a criticism. I think that's just, it is the way it is. So perhaps AI use isn't as advanced. So on that post, there was a great comment back from someone who talked about a fully AI-enabled embedded organization. And that's really interesting. If AI is looking at all your emails, it's transcribing all your meetings, which are typically online, it's doing a constant competitor scan, that's quite interesting, like what it's going to feed back, quite different to perhaps a public sector organization where they're only just moving into enabling staff to use Copilot, for example, and still really using it as a chatbot. What I've seen is some people kind of chucking in a few research reports, a few prompts, and kind of coming out with a strategy. And it's not being helpful. It creates incredibly long, wordy documents. And I think one of the traps that I've seen people falling into, and myself included, is it looks kind of good at first glance. It sort of sounds right. And I think that's one of the things I alluded to in the post was, it's got good strategy sounding headings, vision, objectives, pillars, roadmaps, horizons, all these kind of useful things that you think, this is good. And the priorities, like they're worded in very sort of catchy sounding ways. And you think, these are great. But then when you sort of start interrogating it, it becomes quite obvious that this is not a strategy that anyone can actually implement, or it's kind of missed the point. So I think that's the danger with what I see, and I'm really excited if I'm proven wrong. But what I've seen so far is that using AI, it's kind of missing the point. A good strategy should be looking at, exciting future opportunities that perhaps you hadn't thought of before. And AI is just looking at kind of what's already happened. And yeah, I'll stop there. I'm interested to hear your view on its usefulness in predicting a future for an organization, I guess. Yeah, predicting that. Yeah, it's putting all those pieces together. So we'll just say one more thing on that. In that discovery phase, that's kind of where you think, okay, AI is really going to shine here. Find me all the reports on XYZ provide me a summary, tell me what I need to know. And it will provide you lots of good summary reports. But what I've found is, people don't really put the truth on the internet. And when you really discover the useful insights is when you actually have conversations with the manager who was implementing that strategy or doing that thing, particularly in a local government or government setting. If you have a conversation, you'll hear all about, the challenges that were faced, what really happened behind the scenes. Maybe some really exciting wins that they weren't able to put in a report, or some, big challenges. And to me, that's where you find the really useful insights that are actually going to shape the direction of your strategy. So I think that discovery phase shouldn't just be a desktop research. It should be at least, as a minimum, 3 to 5 kind of key conversations with people around the sector. And I guess the other good thing about public sector is it's not competitive. If another council is dealing with a particular issue, so public libraries, for example, I'm heading to their forum next week. Libraries around New Zealand, Australia, and globally are all facing similar challenges, so we can collaborate on that. And they're very willing to share information. A little bit different in a commercial space where some of those things are commercially sensitive. So back to the question, I'm very interested to hear your views on its ability to kind of take those into the future. Yeah, what are you seeing?
You've hit on a few key things there, Angela. The first one that I'm going to pick up on is you mentioned the AI operating system. So that's the latest thing that I'm working on for businesses, is building a complete operating system that encompasses everything they do, everything they are, everything about how they think, how they write, how they approach things, so that, and I built this for my business, so that my business runs on all of this, and obviously I'm accountable for the outputs that I generate. My judgment, my critical judgment as a human is incredibly important in anything that I produce. But this basically forms the core of my business. So I'm looking to replicate it at the moment. So I was glad that you brought that up, because it's quite an exciting area and it's starting to happen more and more. I think in more complex businesses, it's going to be harder to replicate that. But in smaller businesses, I'm sort of thinking 5 to 20 people. They've probably got the agility to start to adopt something along these lines. So 2 of the things that I like to, I like to talk about a lot. Context being gold, and the ability for AI to produce slop.
Yes.
So without context, without all this background information, without everything that you need to include in a conversation or in a strategy, it's going to produce absolute slop. So as you're saying, if it's not privy to conversations, transcriptions, and all the information that isn't publicly available, you're not going to get that sort of fidelity, and it's not going to be as accurate, as aligned as something that you could produce. So I think if AI has the opportunity to access all of that information, it will produce a much better document. It's not going to be the final document, but it might get you further down the track. And those bones of the document will be better, and they'll be more fleshed out, and it will ultimately save you time. But you need to guide it completely. And again, it's the prompting, it's the context, it's everything that you put into it that shapes it. And you've got to treat AI as a tool, like Word or Excel or anything else, and use it in the right way to shape it into the place that you want it to go. And the other thing that I'll pick up on there is the probability aspect, being, hey, look, it's got huge amounts of knowledge, but it's only probability at the end of the day. That's all it is. If I say the sky is, and today's a good example too, because the sky is blue. If I say the sky is, you think, oh, the sky is blue, because you've heard it so many times, and that's exactly how AI works. It's going to say the next probable thing. So when you're asking basic questions, it's going to give you basic answers based on what's most likely. As you get more advanced, it can answer those questions in a much more nuanced way, and that's how you get much more detail out of it. So for me, everything is context.
And I do think that's a really interesting kind of concept to understand, is that AI is not a magic box that's coming up with these really innovative new ideas. AI is a probability tool. This is what it's seen on the internet, so this is more likely. And I guess you need to decide if that's useful to you in your organization. In some situations, it is very useful. And as you say, coming into some of these conversations with staff or stakeholders, having a set of priorities that perhaps you haven't invested too much resource into, but some, it's a good discussion document, a good starting point, the priorities.
And in the New Zealand context, we have about 82 to 87%, according to the AI Forum, adoption of AI within businesses. But that might mean Grammarly, and it might mean, it might just be spell checking, or Copilot popping up in Outlook and saying, oh, can I summarize this email for you? And then only a third of those organizations have done any training, and only about a third of those organizations have started to scale as well. So the use of AI in New Zealand is very immature. So I created an AI maturity tool, and the people that have filled that in don't really get beyond about a 3 out of 5. If you're getting to a 4, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
But most organizations that I end up working with will be a 1 or a 2.
Yeah.
And it's not just more tools, it's policy and governance and guardrails and everything, and training. And the human aspect is the biggest aspect. And I was having a good conversation yesterday around the technology, and I said the technology is not the problem. It's the people in the process. If you can get that balance a little bit more even, you can start to leverage the technology properly.
Yeah.
But if you don't know what your workflow is, you don't know how the process works, you don't know how you are actually going to go about developing a strategy, you can't use the technology effectively.
That's exactly right. And, in the education setting, that's what they're sort of fighting against is, a student could produce a good assignment with AI and it kind of sounds good, but they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what to look for, what kind of key markers of a useful assignment or a useful strategy are going to be. Yeah, I do think that's really interesting. And one of the other comments actually that came up on that post was about using AI, because I guess for me, I'm living and breathing strategy all day. I read books, I listen to, podcasts. I'm seeing what's working across lots of different organizations and what isn't working. But most people, that's not their day job. That, their manager comes to them and says, oh, we need you to write a strategy for this, or we need a strategy, or sometimes it's just called a plan, because strategy sometimes is a bit overused. But where do you start and where do you go from? Some things it absolutely is a time saver. Other things, I think if I haven't done the thinking or the groundwork first, it actually takes more time. So I've got to keep going through all the information they're giving me. And each time I ask it to, can you make it shorter? It's just flattening the kind of insights down to kind of this lowest common denominator. And I think actually sometimes if I've done the work and I've read the reports and I've had the conversation myself, I'm putting together these quite interesting, diverse kind of concepts that create something new, and it really sparks a whole new way of thinking in a new direction, which could save the organization years of wasted progress, as opposed to just kind of getting an AI summary or something. So time saving. Obviously it does save time in certain things, but does it always save time? Not necessarily.
And a lot of that comes down to how you're using it and the information that you've provided it. And one of the other things that you started to touch on there is the persistent context. If I start a conversation, I go down a track, I have a long conversation, and it'll eventually start to drift off.
Yeah.
Or it needs to compact the conversation, and then it loses fidelity in the conversation. It starts to lose aspects. So one of the things that we're starting to see in AI is the ability to have a persistent context across multiple conversations. So in your context, it might be you're creating a strategy, you create a project for that has all the information there, all that background data that the conversation you're having can pull on. And I think that's probably one of the difficult things at the moment, because there's a lot of things in our heads that aren't in the AI's head.
Yeah.
And you said, you've got to know about all the important things, and they're not necessarily important to the AI that you're using. And you know how to pull them together on a piece of paper. You know, oh, right, we've got to pull this in. I had this conversation with this person, and it might not be documented, but you'll think, oh, right, I've had that conversation. That's important to them and their business and where they're heading. So that needs to form a part of it. And
perhaps I didn't realize it was important at the time. It's only when you have this new, as you say, changing context or changing kind of other piece of insight or information that you think, actually going back to what they said, this really ties that together, and I can see a path there. Yeah.
So when you're having conversations with people in workshops or in one-on-one situations, do you see similar themes coming up in terms of how you're starting to put a strategy together?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's quite a broad question because it's sort of like the whole field of strategy, and there's so much theory around strategy. I guess I always boil down to a strategy as having a really clear ambition of where you want to go and a plan of how you're going to get there. So pretty simple, but how that's communicated or understood or kind of embedded in an organization will change. So I guess I always have an underlying, where's the clear direction? Where do we want to go? What's the outcomes we're trying to achieve? And what are the things we need to enable us to get there? So I think in a strategy process, I'll always have a discovery phase. We'll always have a consulting or discussion phase. And in fact, in public sector, in local government, it's a requirement for most plans and strategies to be consulted with the community, which is really nice. And then we always have a workshop that brings people together to decide. Again, we could miss that workshop out and create it all, but it's bringing people along on that journey and creating that process together. Common themes that I see coming out. Do you mean around AI or just in terms of strategy?
I know when I come into a conversation about AI, I kind of get common themes, or if I'm working with an organisation around their AI strategy, or how, it's not always a strategy, it's their approach. There's always common themes that will come up, and often that is leadership, governance and training are the three things I sort of say, right, we've got to get these right. Are there things that you've got top of mind as you come into the conversation? Is it sort of like, right, we need to ensure that we've got alignment across the exec team and around how the strategy we're building, or is it more focused on the board? Or
I guess in the work I've been doing more recently, I've been working with a lot of managers that are new to their role or new to strategy. So there's a definite common theme of, she have no idea how to do this. My bosses said, we kind of want this goal, or there's some funding for X, Y, Z, or, we need to do this change. How do I even do it? So yeah, there's a lot of sort of guidance of actually just laying out what is a robust process that when you get to the end, you're going to have something that you can stand behind.
Right.
And you can get behind. So I guess that would be a good common theme. I mean, resourcing is a common theme.
Yes.
Strategies, they've been asked to achieve these great outcomes and change and, really improve service or an outcome for the community with either no new budget or certainly insufficient budget. And obviously in local government, we're always dealing with the political context around that as well, actually in central too. So it can change, it sort of, it can be quite volatile where things are. But, I think at the heart of it, all the work I'm working on is people trying to improve outcomes in their local community or for New Zealand. They all want the same thing and they'd all like to be able to do a million things. But that's probably trying to do too much. Yeah,
right.
Trying to do too much. I think that is a really, a big one. Where we're always, especially in this kind of public good space, there's 1,000 different things that we're doing and we want to do them all. And often with these, there's no kind of right or wrong or good or bad decisions. Like all the work is good, all the options are kind of good. So it's choosing the ones that are going to serve the community best or the ones that are going to have, the right outcomes. So definitely prioritization is always a challenge. But, through this process, discover, discuss and decide, that prioritization kind of happens naturally.
So, and when you're thinking, or I guess when the organisations that you're working with are thinking about technology or AI, is that coming into the conversation earlier on than it has in the past?
Yeah. I mean, interestingly for me, I've actually always worked around technology. So when I was at the Ministry for Women, my kind of portfolio role there was around economic empowerment for women. And back then I was saying, technology is the future. We need to have more women involved making those decisions to create the future that we want. It'd be interesting to see if perhaps there was more women creating these, massive tech companies and things where, or not just women, but a diverser range of people creating the technology that we're using, where would we be? Because it will create different solutions for different people. So for me, I've always seen technology as an enabler, and it's always been part of the conversation. AI is obviously coming up a lot. So how do councils, public sector organisations use it as an enabler? Yeah, I would see it always as this underlying enabler rather than a kind of a pillar in their strategy. Interestingly, in public libraries, they do a huge amount of work enabling the community to be able to function in the digital society. So anything, obviously we know your bank, your, loyalty card at the supermarket all requires a bit of nous to sign up, download the app, be able to open it. And not everyone in the community can do that easily, and libraries are a real gateway people go to for help in that. So digital enablement is becoming a big part of what a library actually needs to deliver, and therefore has to be embedded pretty solidly in their strategy. And I think, that's a change that I'm seeing. I think it is definitely part of the conversation, but as an enabler rather than a key pillar. I mean, it wasn't long ago when we were still grappling with the thing of, are we even using AI? I feel like in the last 6 months even, the public sector's come a long way in how that's been implemented and rolled out. And talking to a friend the other day who's in a tech company, and their kind of thing was, if you're not using AI, you're fired kind of thing. It's way at the other end of the spectrum. You've got to be embedding it in everything you do and using it to its full capacity. So yeah, I think we've got a long way to go. I think other organisations are needing AI strategies. That is a specific thing. They need to actually have a clear, those guidelines and guardrails, the proper governance from the board. They do need an AI strategy kind of separate to all their work, but an AI strategy that's going to inform how they use it and how it enables all the other great work that they need to do. So yeah, that's a conversation I'm seeing a lot.
So if we shift gear a little bit, and you mentioned the board there and the discussions around AI being potentially pushed down from the board, are you starting to see that in your governance roles? More conversations around AI, or are people resistant?
Actually, some really interesting conversations. And again, with a board role, one of the real benefits of a board member is that they're seeing things across a lot of different organisations because they're sitting on different boards. And it's the same with my strategy work. I can see a lot of different teams and how things are working. And, I know the board is responsible for not only setting strategy, but also approving policies as well. So there was that, even that initial conversation around the board table, do we need an AI policy? And, sort of now, obviously, yes, you do. But early on, maybe 12 months ago, that was a conversation. So now we've sort of moved past that. What does the AI policy need to have in it? What's safe? And obviously there's some great examples out there, but a lot of those AI policies are still being written as the tool is developing so fast, and how we use it and how it becomes kind of a mesh with our daily life. So it's a pretty interesting conversation, especially where public money is involved. How are we kind of using this great tool? So yeah, another interesting anecdote I heard at a Institute of Directors lunch the other day, they talked about how with your board time, how much time you spend on operations, how much time you spend on strategy in the future. And we still, even though governance is about strategy and governance, it's not about operations. Still, most of the conversations are landing in the operations space. And it's a constant challenge with anything strategic or future, and AI is absolutely part of that. That boards in general, we do need to carve out time to actually have those discussions, bring the different expertise from the room together and talk about it. I think we're still spending 90% of our time in general on kind of quite operational, functional, what's happening this month kind of thing. What's the latest crisis? What's the kind of upcoming crises or opportunities? But yeah, setting aside a good 40% to actually think about those more strategic questions, of which AI is a central part of at the moment. Yeah, we do need to do that. And it's a challenge. That lunch was just quite recent, so something that I'll be taking forward.
Yes. I recently wrote a presentation for a board down south, and it was around AI, and it was more of on an educational sort of basis. And this is often the conversation I'll have with a lot of businesses, and I have to start at the point, this is what AI is. This is what it can do. This is what it can't do. These are the opportunities in your industry. And this is how you could leverage it in the future.
Yeah.
And I think it's unlike other technology because you've got to start at the start with it, because there's a lot of people that don't have fundamental understanding of the fact that it's been around for 75 years. We've been using AI for
Yes,
a long time.
totally. I think that's a really interesting insight, isn't it? That it
Yeah.
already is embedded and has been for a really long time.
Most people are using it 10 plus times a day.
Yeah, yeah.
You'll get, you jump on your Amazon, you want to buy something, it's using AI to make recommendations. Supermarkets are using AI, Netflix.
What do you want to watch next?
Yeah. So most people are using it passively. I think the change is organisations are starting to use it actively
Yeah, yeah.
and actually using it more as a tool rather than something that sits in the background. So that is, a very common conversation that seems to crop up.
And I think that's a good way to approach it, is just to always stay in that curious camp. And, I think I used ChatGPT when it sort of came out publicly, and I got a paid version quite quickly, just to kind of stay in it. There's nothing to win if you just kind of shut these things out. And it's time, I guess, to do that as well, and to make mistakes with it and kind of see what it comes out with, and sort of not be afraid to just sort of go in. And I can imagine that, at the board level, education is a huge thing, because when you're at the board level, you're making quite big decisions. You're making decisions that are going to impact the whole organization or a lot of people, and you want to make safe decisions. Your risk comes up a lot, and I think AI and risk is still a really big topic. And it's no use if a board is just completely governed by risk, but it's such a big part of it that it does influence a lot of conversations around AI at the moment.
So over the last couple of years, what are some of the things that have surprised you about working in governance and working with other people on boards?
I know when I did the internship, one of the things I was really interested in was the decision making, how people actually came to good decision making. So obviously that links to strategy as well. And from my work at the Ministry for Women, all the data and research about how diversity leads to good decision making. So that was really cool to see in practice, that actually that is how you make good decisions, is you have diverse perspectives, diverse input, a robust discussion that is able to kind of go to wherever it needs to go. And that is how you come up with good decision making. Actually, at the end of the day, there's no sort of magic formula. It's really this robust process, and that's why you have a board with a number of people on it. It's in addition to the chief executive and the executive leadership team. So that's been really good. Probably that focus on operations when we're still meant to be focused on governance and strategy. And I find myself falling into that trap too, because you want to ask this question, or that's interesting, or that is a it comes up in every kind of IOD discussion or things, and for good reason, because we're all drawn to these kind of shiny things in the day to day, which is good. And I was privileged to be part of a strategy process, and it was really interesting to see quite often there is a tension between the board and the executive team, and it's sort of just the way, the structure of the relationship, because you've sort of got people who are deep knowledge of the business or the organisation, they're doing the data, they live it and breathe it every day, and a board that has broad knowledge that's coming in for 2 hours a month or an hour every 6 weeks, or a day every 6 weeks to kind of influence and guide and direct. And it's quite an unusual sort of relationship to navigate. And through the strategy process, I really saw the value of having an external facilitator come in to help be that kind of objective party, to help facilitate that robust discussion between the executive and the board. So it's just been really interesting, and I guess from that psychology perspective, how people interact and relate together, and just that real value of having a neutral person in the conversation, kind of facilitating that, enabled a much richer and deeper conversation to come out.
That made me think of something then, Angela. In terms of when you're working with a business around their strategy, is the board always involved, or is it sometimes just the exec?
So it's really interesting, and I don't think there is an exact process, because it's what works best for the organisation. Theoretically, technically, the board is responsible for setting the strategy. That's kind of not negotiable. But how much work does the exec team do, to actually shape that up and bring some options? But it needs to be brought in such a way where there's, open discussion and opportunity to move. And sometimes the board might see a different picture and want different outcomes. And that can be really challenging when the exec teams put a lot of work in, because the exec team have to own it and deliver it, but the board is on setting it. With most of my work, as I said, it's in public sector, so local government. So the governance is elected members, which is another whole different thing as well, because they're not necessarily experts in the particular field that you're working on, but they are elected to represent the community. So, yeah, and it's a whole different process. You do need to get community consultation and buy-in and support, and actually listen genuinely if they're saying something that doesn't align with this beautiful plan that you've got. You need to respond to that. And elected members, again, a good strategy will be a useful communication tool. You should be able to communicate the aspiration and the why and that kind of really clear pathway, so that someone who doesn't have expertise in that area can pick it up and say, okay, this makes sense to me. I can see there's a robust process, and I can see the community voice in this, and I can, have confidence to back it. Again, they're always sort of talking about mitigating risk. So if you can give them that clear picture, I think it's really helpful. So yeah, there is a really interesting tension there, but the more robust discussion you have, I think, at the end of the day, it makes it stronger.
So you mentioned before that you are working with a few new leaders who are starting to develop potentially their first strategy. Is AI something that you introduce into the conversation if it's appropriate, or is that something that's more driven by their side?
I think maybe a year ago, even a year ago, it was like, are you using AI? It's like, are you cheating? It was quite negative.
Yes.
So now I don't need to introduce it into the conversation. People are using it. It's great. People are, typically come with, a bit of a summary that AI has given them, or some tools, and kind of interested in the concept of can AI be a strategy coach? And I kind of have been testing it a little bit ahead of this podcast. Can it help me be a better strategist? Is it giving me some good prompts? And I think the answer is, a bit, but, some useful things. And I am a sort of person that likes to think out loud. So I do love to have this kind of tool that will listen to me endlessly. It becomes a bit circular in the end, but, so back to your question, what part of it? People are using it. So yeah, I'm not introducing it. I know I was in a workshop with someone who was facilitating it, and their answer to everything was AI. And it just really, I know, and it just sort of, I was like, really, this is the value you're adding here? It's sort of, I don't think it's the answer to everything. I mean, definitely embedded in, in lots of things and a useful tool, but yeah, that's certainly not my approach. Yeah, I do encourage leaders to use it, but we do have good conversations about how to use it and how to test it, like where it's useful. And to me, I think it is around that, some good initial research, some testing of your ideas, but don't let it replace that kind of thought. And because at the end of the day, then that leader has to take that strategy and present it to the senior leadership team, or to their boss, or to a council even. And if they haven't done the thinking or kind of been really embedded in the process, that's really hard to do. You're sort of just presenting this thing that someone else made for you. So probably, again, it just all depends. If someone's overusing it, we'll kind of encourage them to kind of pull back and think about what is their own thinking through this. If someone's not using it all, we'll certainly encourage them to, ask it a few questions and throw a few things in it. Yeah, case by case.
It's a really great segue into my final question for you. So in the age of AI, what's the one trait that you think defines human leadership?
Such a great question. Something my dad used to always remind me of, especially when I was kind of starting out of my career, was that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I mean, it's a very popular quote, but I think in this kind of era of information saturation, this kind of still people caring, and in a lot of the work I do, there's often a bit of team culture and dynamics around a strategy process, and the teams that I see that are performing really well, that their manager is valuing them, showing appreciation. So yeah, I think despite all this incredible knowledge and access to information we have, people knowing that you care about them or feeling valued is still absolutely fundamental and critical to leadership today.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you, Angela. I really appreciate your time today. It was fantastic to have a chat, and we'll probably continue off camera.
Definitely. I learned a lot myself, so yeah, thanks very much, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you. That's the Ken. Thanks for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, share it with a leader at your network who needs to hear it. Subscribe wherever you listen to stay updated on the next conversation. Visit gem.nz for show notes, resources and more. Connect with us on LinkedIn or Instagram for updates in between episodes. I'm Ben Walker. We'll be back soon with another conversation that matters. See you then.